So we will be very, very quick. Yep, so this is the group that worked on one sprint is not enough. I want to show you a quick heat map we did based on the typology that I introduced this morning, because I think it's interesting to see where people's experiences are and also where they want to explore. So the yellow dots are the I've done it from this group here. So you can see there's quite an even split between the 6, which I think is really curious. And then, as you can see, the I've done it is the yellow and is more towards, well, this side. And then the blue is the I want to do it. So as you can see, the I've done it is, most people have experience running sequential sprints for the same context, which makes sense. I think most of these are product sprints. Where we were most curious about is really in this ad hoc part. And since this is really more about developing that organizational capability to be able to do sprints. And so you see we have one yellow, and this was Felix. Yeah, from Google, from Kai's team. So it was cool to learn a bit from him. And I'll pass my mic. So we focused on, we had subgroups for here, here, and we'll hear a tiny bit from each group. We were not in, let's define the problem and try to solve it with the solution. It was really sense making of what we're curious about in this space. So,
teams. And the 1, 2, 3, 4.
Est-ce que tu as the image of the framework? No? So just to remind you, this model is when you run multiple sprints with different challenges, but to tackle a larger challenge. So we wanted to answer the following question, like, what was the need to do this kind of sprints? What were the tips and tricks we could provide to the group when you run this kind of sprint? And what are the remaining questions we have for that? Just what I'm going to share is not everything because it's a little bit long, but we had a discussion in the group on what is the value proposition of each type of sprint organization. Why should you run a set of several sprints together at the same time with everyone, and why you should run ad hoc sprints? What is the value of that? So for the fourth model, it appeared that it's very interesting to run a large ideation session when it comes after research phase and insight phase, and when you want to generate several kinds of concepts, but give them a very tangible prototype and align everyone on the concept. It was also interesting. You can do that in an acceleration program. So if you run an accelerator and you have several startups, then the multiple sprint is interesting because you have each startup working on her challenge, and then maybe also sharing the energy, the group, and the process of the sprint methodology. It can help you to build a roadmap, so you can have several teams, technical teams working in several challenges, but then at the end you can build a global roadmap, technical roadmap for the company. And for that, it's interesting that you can have one product and draw several user journeys, and so tackle different kind of challenge for one product and draw several paths. And then, so what we learn, what we think is important if you want to really get the best of doing several sprints with this divergent approach, is that you have to really prepare the challenge before and set the right set of questions and sub-questions that you will do in this sprint. And also you have to think that there is also a converging phase, which is not the case when you have maybe one separated sprints, then you go on and go on. So the converging phase is maybe what is different in this approach. You kind of take key learnings of what you can take from each separated challenge and make maybe a cross matrix of what you can learn from each challenge, and maybe have some insights from this creativity session.
Hey everyone. We've worked on number 1 here. So it's a sequential same team. We only 2 people on this one, so the sample is quite limited. On this small sample, there was already two very different contexts. One was a long development cycle with sort of sprint methodology, so in the sense of 2-week cycles. And the major problem was how do you update over time the vision on the product. So you run a sprint at the very beginning, and how do you make sure 1 month and a half afterwards people still share the same vision, are still aligned. The second context was more running a sequence of explorations. So using the sprint methodology as a way to explore what's behind an idea, zooming in on the product. Then look at the result and maybe rescope the idea and zooming in again. So changing the mission a bit of a time in order to try to find the right mission. And what was interesting is that in both cases, the question was about what part of the sprint methodology you keep and with which parts you replace with something else. In the first context, it was more about keeping the mission part. So if the mission changes a lot over time, there is a problem with building the product because the mission is changing. In the exploration part, the mission is what changes all the time. And what you want to not do is probably the testing and the prototyping, because you want to iterate really fast on just the ideas.
Okay, and I was part of a group of like 6 or 7 people, and we talked mostly about this one right here. So the ad hoc same team, and the only person to have done this in our group was Felix. So it was basically like a heavy question and answer session with Felix, and it lasted like an hour and a half. So what I'm going to tell you is something like writing a 4-page summary of a 400-page report. So what I'm going to try and break it down with just 3 questions. So the first question that was sort of the guiding theme was, is it part of a process? The second question was, how do you get there? And the third question is, when do you actually use this? So it's very different than the other types of sprint approaches because it's just incredibly organic. Whereas the other 2 are sort of organized by a sprint master or by someone that comes in and is like, let's just set up a sprint and run the sprint. The ad hoc approach is really the team that says, we should probably do a sprint right now. When we talk about how it's actually done, it's really the people that are part of a team that get together and try and take a step back. So this is sort of a conversation we had towards the end. It's like, when do you actually use it? So it's usually when you're really deep into something and you need to take a step back and look at how you're doing your current work, or if something's changed significantly in the way you work or in your product, then at that point you can sort of use this ad hoc methodology. And the other important thing about this is that it kind of joins up with this idea of culture. So it's really part of a culture, and it takes a long time to get there. So what Felix was saying is that sprints sort of started as an activity of ideation, and only when people started realizing the gains that they were getting out of the sprint and the context in which it was used, did it actually begin to be associated to like actual business goals and used really concretely to develop features for different products. Voilà.
Thank you.